Welcome to HirewithEve.ai podcast. HirewithEve.ai is an AI tool to pre-screen candidates and accurately identify their skills to help you cut down your hiring time by 90%. In this podcast series, we interview and have in-depth conversations with global HR leaders across industries and geographies to understand current HR trends, leadership challenges, workforce plannings, and many more interesting topics. So with that, let's dive into today's conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Rahul Abhisek, the founder of HirewithEve.ai, and an AI tool which helps reduce hiring time by 90%. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, and it's a real pleasure to welcome Balazs Dianovszky. Balazs currently is the talent and the culture lead at Sandvik, which is a mining industry giant, about 12 billion in revenue. Previously, Balazs was at Goldman Sachs, and he has a strong background in talent management and culture building. So, welcome, Balazs.
Thanks, Abhishek. Thank you for the invite.
So, Balazs, one of our first question as a warm up is we believe HRs and talent acquisition are really the superheroes of the organization because they bring the team together that really works on the mission and delivers on the goal, right? So what I really want to understand from you is what do you think are some of their superpowers? And then post that, it would be great to also hear what do you think are some of their weaknesses?
I agree with the principle. Yes, HR talent acquisition. I think any sort of human interaction in these days is the superpower of any organization. And obviously, HR talent acquisition driving that sort of cultural alignment, aligned execution, and obviously the employee life cycle. And whenever you think about the employee life cycle, that starts at an early stage of employer branding, talent value proposition, and goes through several processes in the organization: strategic workforce planning, hiring plans, and so on and so on. We can get this into detail later on, but in terms of that core common place where all departments are amalgamating, all processes are crossing each other. The crossroad, the element or crossroad for each organization, I do believe is HR. And a superpower is that their influence is huge within the whole organization. As a stakeholder perspective, well, the weakness could be sometimes I would say probably there's a wee bit too much riding on the success of the execution. If you think about whenever there's any challenges on the market in terms of time to hire, availability of talent, cost of talent, these are all heavily impacting the bottom line because let's be clear, what is the biggest overhead in these days? It's always the talent which is being brought into the organization acts as the largest overhead. So yeah, superpower, I would definitely agree. Lot of influence. But again, from a weakness perspective, I think sometimes the expectations are too high. But again, driving a really transparent conversation from the start, I think these are manageable risks. And yeah, also an opportunity to drive a more fruitful cooperation.
Okay. And I mean, thanks for that. So, taking that forward, what would be then your vision of talent acquisition role in driving business growth and success?
It's a controversial one, and I said this not one time, and sometimes eyebrows are being raised. I do believe that talent acquisition itself should be sitting outside HR. I think it's a function that should have their own seat at the table. On a leadership level or an advisory level, I don't want to go into that. I think it depends on the size of the organization and the overall goal. But because of the impact level and negative and positive, I do believe that the TA itself, talent acquisition, recruitment, workforce planning, and so on and so on, they should have a seat at the table. And again, on an advisory level from an early stage. So any businesses out there which are starting up, ramping up, expanding, or building down, ramping down, they should be always consulting their TA specialist in terms of what does that look like from a cost, an execution, a timeline perspective. what are the opportunities, what are the risks, and also, what the function should need from the organization itself. Obviously, we all know that there's multiple agencies out in the market in each and every country. I don't want to use the word that the market is saturated, but there's, I don't know how many thousands of agencies are in the UK just on its own, from small to large. Sometimes hiring managers are thinking that fitting the role is just, I'll post a job and I'll make a phone call. And I think widening that aspect, what does that mean? How does it look if only an agency hires for you? Where's your talent value proposition? Where's your employer brand? And is an agency really going to be capable of handling anything over? And I'm saying this, I did work on the agency side for a long, long time. So I can speak from an experience behalf that, yeah, sometimes it's handled on different levels.
All right, all right. I mean, let's go deeper there. So, what makes you say that talent acquisition should have a seat at the table? It would be great if you elaborate on that.
Look, think about a basic scenario, and I think always it's 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 something that you can grasp, that you can hold on. If you think about base of talent strategy, so what you need to develop a talent strategy is you need an employer brand. So we start employer branding, talent value propositions, whether it be talent, employment, and so on and so on. Compensation and benefits. What are we offering? Is it competitive? Is it not? What the benefit package looks like? And we are not just talking about the financial benefits or your insurances or whatever else. There's a lot of other things that you need to take into consideration whenever you go to market. How are we prioritizing DEI? Again, some use it as a buzzword. We all seen it, unfortunately. Some take it really seriously, which should be taken really seriously. But again, prioritizing that, the organization need to be reviewed, processes need to be reviewed. Are we really aligned? It's great that the talent acquisition specialist would go out and say, oh, we're a DEI organization and we're taking equality really seriously. And then you have a hiring manager who might not live up to that. What are the candidates that are going to walk away? Next step, technology. So we're just jumping from department to department. If you think about it, employer branding, marketing, compensation, benefits, finance, diversity, a bit of culture, leverage your technology and automation, IT. These all are sitting at the table. So in terms of stakeholder management, in terms of input and output, I do believe that TA should be sitting at the table. If not on a decision-making level, definitely from an advisory level. And then we haven't even touched on execution, building a talent pool. Not an easy task. People say, oh, I have 1,000 CVs. I've seen it myself. And then onboarding, candidate experience. What about the employees' development getting forward? What the future looks like, learning and development, career growth. How do you foster work-life balance? How do you create an engaging and collaborative culture? Again, these are all elements that are touching in each and every department. And yeah, that would be my called an argumentative point that TA should be sitting at the table really, really heavily.
Right, makes sense. That makes sense. And when you mention about this reviewing thousand of CVs, etc., I mean that of course is I would say I would think is also bulk of the work. What would you kind of add to that and value that it kind of brings to the leadership table?
Yeah. When you said bulk of the work, it hits home with ones who've been in the trenches, and I would call, the essence of talent acquisition and recruitment is understanding the market. You will not understand the market, and you not understand the people on the market if you don't source. I do believe that the majority of recruitment exercises fail because their base sourcing criteria haven't been met. Your job description is not correct. You haven't had an intake call with a hiring manager properly. You don't know the market. You don't use the right tools. This day and age, LinkedIn on its own, we're not gonna cut it. We all know that. There's sourcing techniques I don't really want to go into because we don't have enough time, but that's one of my hobbies where how you can source on the market for roles that are really difficult to fill. But this is where it starts. And when I say bulk of the work, that's just you getting to know that segment of the market. That's the
Yeah,
legwork.
but please feel free to elaborate. Would be very unique also. for you to share. Yeah.
Look, I'll give you an example next, but and again, from my perspective, it is a situation where you're carrying the opportunities with the role to go out to the market, to put employer branding on the table, to put your compensation on the table, to talk to people, to try to find candidates. Unfortunately, it is a competitive market. And again, I always used to say to sourcers, to recruiters who worked alongside with me, imagine it like this. You walk on the street and you're going to ask 100 people, do you want to work in this job? They're going to look at you and say, I don't even know you. Why you talk to me? It's exactly the same thing when you go out and you start approaching people using whatever platform, LinkedIn, social media. You do a bit of reverse sourcing on GitHub if you're working on tech roles. Look, the opportunities are endless, but this is the situation that you need to put yourself into. What's my value proposition that I'm taking away from the company as a recruiter, as a talent specialist? What is the sales pitch? What is the selling point for this role? What is our propositions out there? How I can convey it in a way that if I talk to somebody on the street, I spark an interest and at least they listen to what I have to say. And it's not one of those that, oh my, who's this weirdo who's just flagging me down the street and say, hey, do you want to work for us?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you say like this is in the trenches and that is what the work is, I totally understand. As I do that myself for the company, so I totally understand that. Would be great if you actually, since we talked about being on the street and asking people, do you want to work here with, or and at the same time, we have all of these platforms that we use. How can you give us some examples of how you are leveraging some of the unique value proposition of these tools and how you are kind of clubbing capabilities of different tools together to then have a great outcome, great sourcing methodology?
Look, for me, it all starts with the intake call. As long as we make it clear of, I don't want to use the word picture frame, but a hiring manager that I'm not going to name here, but he used to hire a lot of people and we worked really closely together. He used to use the terminology of picture frame. Yeah. And some people find this pejorative and some people find it funny. In my perspective, is that's the hiring manager's picture frame and it's down to that talent specialist recruiter to expand that picture frame or to shrink that picture frame to fit the candidate pool that you're working on. It's important that the sourcer, recruiter, the talent specialist understands the role, the expectations, the skills level required, deep dives into what are the transferable skill sets that are there, and has a really good understanding of the JD. You know, I used to say to a lot of recruiters I worked alongside, you work on a role, you should be able to hem the JD off from the top of your head. And also pool for that role. So if you work with an organization and you specialize in a field or you specialize in a certain discipline, you have to talent pool really, really heavily. And that doesn't mean you need to talk to everybody on a weekly basis, but you need to spark interest using employer branding, value proposition, and then using the platforms the right way. Look, again, naming no names here. I think we all have been around in the market that we have tried everything, whatever is there to reach out to people. Okay. I'm a firm believer of I would call it raw sourcing. That would be my terminology on it. Okay. So if I get to a difficult situation where the usual suspect platforms of like social media, LinkedIn, HireVue, I don't know, we can keep going on and tell, there's plenty. Look, this is not a promotional spot here. They're not helping. Then you need to get into understanding of who are your talent pool, try to understand names, try to find those names, try to get mobile numbers for them, email addresses, because there are people who are not on social media, not on LinkedIn, not
Right.
on GitHub, or they're inactive.
Right.
And it's a difficult ask. But then again, as I said, what do you say when you get there?
Exactly.
So, hi,
So how
Rahul,
do
I
you
got
make
your
AI?
number. You want to work for us? Your first question would be, how did you get my number? So,
Exactly.
you know, you need to be prepared for these type of conversations. And again, starts with the basics. The better your value proposition is, your JD is, you better you understand the role, the easier you will get into a fluid conversation with an individual and say, look, I know it's an out of blue call, but I rang you because of this. Is this the right time? I do think, or I emailed you, or you know, we all get messages, we all get phone calls. Nobody likes a spam call, nobody likes a spam email. If you studied the role, you know why you're approaching that individual, you will be more welcome than a stranger waving somebody down and saying, "Hey, do you want to work for us?"
Yeah, yeah. Just to kind of expand that one step further, what is then your strategy for talent acquisition?
I would say it differs on every role, and that would be the honest answer. There's a base strategy of, obviously, as we've done the step by step, you know, understanding the organization that you work for. It's different characters and different skill sets are implementable in, for example, in an industrial organization or a manufacturing organization. And even within manufacturing, you know, there's some people who would be maybe a better fit for a future-based industry like space, like some sort of R&D in terms of future transport opportunities, or in terms of really traditional food manufacturing, FMCG, and so on and so on. There's an element there where you can start to diversify, but you need to remember there's transferable skill sets. So in terms of, you know, we bring back an example from investment banking where you could have a conversation and people say, "Oh, we can't get talent here because we want quants," and you find a talent pool, for example, people who work in rocket propulsion industry, statistical roles, who would be perfect for
Yeah,
quant roles.
yeah.
And you say to the hiring manager, what would you like? You know, there's people you can hire here for less money, and they're rocket scientists. They're probably 10 times smarter and efficient than anybody who comes out of an Ivy League school. But then again, you know, and start building on that. So from a strategy perspective, understand the role, know your value proposition, employer branding, compensation, what are you offering, who you approaching, leveraging your technology and your automation because it saves a lot of time, and then go on a hunt.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the hunt is easy if you're sitting at that table and you have conversations with the relevant people and you implement strategic workforce planning at an early stage. And you know that within the next 12 months, we will be hiring for the following roles. You might not know the exact job title, but you will know the department because there will be a budget allocated to that, some sort of JD allocated to that, which means quarter by quarter, you know exactly what you are going to work on. Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball and you don't know the levers that you need to replace, but at least you know what your organization is planning to hire for, and it's a big help.
Well, yeah, 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 yeah. So future planning and then also looking into places where you generally not look into, and all of that
Yep.
helps you. I mean, if I just try to dig a bit deeper there, then of course you have resources, you have time, and then there are current goals, current positions to be filled. How do you balance then these future roles along with the current immediate roles to be filled?
Look, again, it's part of the employee life cycle where again this is, I do believe that TA should be sitting at the table to some extent, even on an advisory level. TA should be aware of, you know, why are things are changing.
Right.
If managers are carrying out one-to-one conversations on a regular basis, carrying out performance review, TA should be aware if there's somebody that might be having performance issues, what are the root causes, and it might be needing a replacement. Again, if somebody is planning to leave, not feeling comfortable in the organization, why, who's leaving, who's planning to leave, so you can proactively talent pool. The worst executions I've seen in my life in terms of recruitment is whenever it's let's put the fire out.
Hmm.
Those are the worst executions. You cannot successfully hire people into roles with with nothing. Yes, you can go out to agencies who will do their really, really best. I've no doubt to supply you with the right candidates for the right role. That is their edge. But in reality, if an organization invested in the talent role, that talent role should be able to do the same if they are given the necessary time and given the necessary resources and the necessary heads up and information.
Right. Right.
And it goes to, again, being agile, adapting to the change what is there. We're focusing on quality over quantity, but again, we need to understand of, why are these people leaving the business? What is our overall conclusion? And again, feeding that back into the other functions, to HR, to learning and development, and saying, look, we're seeing an influx of underperformers. Are we setting the goals wrong? Are the OKR not clear? Or is our managers being tasked to be too demanding? Is there a larger demand and the capacity hasn't been aligned with it? There's so many questions that can be raised there. And again, it's just a constructive, open conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely, definitely makes sense. In fact, would you say that pretty much all of these factors are in fact the challenges of a talent acquisition, or if I ask you to elaborate on challenges, there are higher level factors as well?
Look, I've worked in a few industries, so my observation would be is talent talent acquisition is a really challenging but really rewarding role. Okay, you will never win, but you will never lose. So it's one of those that I think it's a lifelong learning situation. The challenges themselves offer an opportunity to review all what's went wrong and what we had done right. So looking at it from a negative and positive perspective, I do not believe that there's a negative and positive perspective on this. I do believe it's more like constantly reviewing your process, keeping an eye on the market, keeping an eye on future developments, understanding where you are. It's really important to understand what the populace thinks of you as a company, because again, it's a lifelong divide of human beings, touchy-feely emotions, therefore interaction, therefore, whatever is our core belief of who we are as humans. Companies are ones and zero. Non-profit or profit oriented, it doesn't matter. It's processes and ones. There's no emotions there. See that bringing the two together, it's a tricky bit. I don't think everybody ever got to a stage of leveling it right, but I do believe that talent acquisition is one that definitely helps this sort of bringing the two sides together and have mutual understanding. And the value proposition is one of these things. The value proposition is your test.
Right.
Is your test if you can flag down the people at the street and say, hi, do you want to work for me?
Yeah. So, definitely value proposition is what really interests or catches the attention, and then you can have longer conversation. So that
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. Balazs, we're coming to an end to the podcast episode. So one of my final question to you would be that what would be your advice to the younger generation about to join the workforce, specifically within the domain of HR? What would be your advice for them?
Look, in terms of HR, I would be cautious because I've never, apart from talent acquisition, recruitment, I never really worked in a traditional HR function.
Yeah.
From a talent perspective, I would recommend this role. These roles are for people who like a challenge and who like a reward, and not being scared of putting the work in if they have to, but also taking feedback on board really quickly and being really adaptive to change. It's really rewarding. It's not a one-stop shop where there's certain characters will succeed or not succeed. I've seen recruiters who are totally introvert succeed in ways that you would never imagine, and I've seen recruiters who are totally extrovert and succeed in ways, and vice versa on the failure side of it. Learn your basics. That's one of the most important things. Learn from the best, which is always your competition. There's never a shame of learning from the best and understanding what it takes to strike up a conversation, whether it be a virtual or real one. As I said, flagging people down the street, that is the same thing when you send a message on LinkedIn. We don't know each other. We never met. It's the same thing. Somebody walks up to you and say, hi, looked at your profile. You look absolutely fantastic. Do you want to work for us? And people will go, who are you? Why are you messaging me? Where you got my number? And anyway, I don't want to talk to you. There's ways and means of doing this. Use automation, it's there. The tools which are available compared to what were there 10 years ago are second to none. The
Right.
industry is seeing an absolute revolution in terms of the volume of big data available, the machine learning solution, and some of the AI technologies which are helping us. Fantastic. From utilizing this, it's so much easier, which means people should have more time to focus on the core principles of sourcing, recruiting, reviewing their processes, keeping an eye on the competition, keeping an eye on the market, and constantly advising the departments within the organization of what we can do differently, what do we see. And it doesn't mean that it's process that needs to be, written in stone, but it's going back and providing that feedback. We all know onboarding, it's the magic word. A lot of companies are suffering still today. Lengthy onboarding process, remote, hybrid workers, even on site, induction, what it should be. Is it boring? Death by part. We all heard it, and there's solutions across the market. Again, how we can make it simpler, how we can execute an onboarding process where people feel welcome. Because again, when you're onboarding somebody, you're welcoming a stranger to your house. You feel awkward welcoming these people into your organization, which is natural because
Yeah.
we don't really know each other apart from 3-4 hours of interview. It's like somebody compared it to one day of speed dating because it's compared to that.
It is. It
But
is.
can you
Yeah.
imagine how awkward that individual feels whenever they walk into a building?
Yeah.
As an organization, you're part of an organization as a hiring manager, as a talent colleague, you're part of that organization. You feel awkward welcoming a new start because you don't know them, but at least you have your colleagues around them, which is a bit of a safety net. How awkward that individual feels walking into a big building, theoretically remote, hybrid, or on-site, knowing nobody, maybe
Yeah.
spend 3 hours with a hiring manager, and they're going to spend pretty much 40 working hours per week with people that they only got to know now. So yeah, it's I think it's an egg that hasn't been cracked yet.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. I think whoever is listening can do something about it, because definitely
Yeah,
viewer and interviewee specifically experience is definitely an area where there is a lot of solutioning going on. But then if you really put it so vividly like that, it's nothing out there, I think, that is really addressing that area.
yeah. And it's always about thinking about the natural feel. We can
Yeah.
have all the processes in the world. We can imagine how people will react in certain situations. We always say to everybody, the easiest way to touch it, to feel it, to digest it is imagine a real life scenario.
Right.
You flag somebody down on the streets. Do you want to work for me?
Yeah.
Speed dating. You're going to meet 10 hiring managers an hour each, 3 different interview slots, 6 hours of interview. Recruiter phones you, makes you an offer. You're starting next week. Somebody phones you from IT, ask you the question about what should be your password. You get your laptop and your phone in the mail, and then you're standing there in front of the big building, and the hiring manager comes down and say, "Welcome to the organization." Yeah, it's a lonely place.
Yeah, I mean that definitely puts into perspective how you have to go about doing your job as talent acquisition, and it's
Yeah.
not just over when you've acquired the talent, but really made them part of the organization where now they have pals and they're part of the culture, and they're really back into their work and life both.
Yes. And who's their buddy, who's their colleague that they can go to, who they can touch base with, how they know their teams, that there's so many elements of it. And again, retaining that talent. And I will leave you this is something that started like mm, started thoughts and sparks in my mind about probably 24 months ago. How do you retain the talent to become a to stay a promoter?
Yeah.
So how do you get to the stage whenever a talent exits from your business, but they still positively promote your business? And there has been a few examples where I've seen people who were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years no longer with an organization, but whenever on a screening call or a catch-up call or a coffee, I asked them, what would be your recommended organization? Then they straight away went back to those old days or to those companies and said, I used to work for X, Y, and Z, and I would still recommend them. I think that is definitely a joker in the pack that companies should start working around exploring further.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think on that note, that really gives us something to look forward to in terms of what should be developed and improved on. Which where I would leave it to the younger audience who's then again joining the workforce to really think about it. Right. So again, so Balazs, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts and insights. I think they're
No
definitely
worries.
unique and brings in a fresh perspective of how we need to go about talent acquisition. So again, thanks a lot and wish you the very best ahead.
Thank you very much for the invite, Rahul. It was an absolute pleasure.